Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 416 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Dave Rubin. He's the creator and host of the popular talk show The Rubin Report, which often features guests who are critical of the mainstream media. He also performs stand-up comedy in cities across the United States. And together with Jordan Peterson, he traveled the world to help promote Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. And we'll be speaking with him today about his new book, Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. And now here's our interview with Dave Rubin. All right, so we're here with Dave Rubin. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you.
Okay, so based on my research, I have a list here of some of your favorite science fiction. So we've got Star Wars, Contact, Battlestar Galactica, The Matrix, Back to the Future, Total Recall, Interstellar, Minority Report, and A Scanner Darkly. So is that a pretty good list of some of your favorite stuff?
It's funny, as you're telling me the list, I'm going, those are all pretty solid movies. Yeah, that's a lot of it right there. You can see I have a definite, like, Philip K. Dick dystopian part of me. You know, the Star Wars part is sort of the childhood, mystical, magical part. And then I like, you know, the combination of those. I would say, you know, Minority Report is like sort of mystical, whoa, what could happen with the future? And then it really goes dystopian. But I love sci-fi movies. I love time travel movies. I love, you know, anything that just makes us think about what tomorrow will be like. Because I think anyone, if you're going to do what I do for a living, which is mostly politics, I mean, why do you care about this stuff? You care about it because you're trying to shape a better tomorrow. And basically every good sci-fi movie is about a tomorrow that something usually goes pretty awry.
It's funny you say that. You know, in college, I majored in political science, and I did that explicitly because I loved political science fiction like Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, and I wanted to be able to write stuff like that someday.
Starship Troopers was, that's Paul Verhoeven, I think, was the director who also did Total Recall. And Total Recall probably is my favorite all time. The original Schwarzenegger one is probably my all-time favorite sci-fi movie.
Robert Heinlein wrote the novel, and the Verhoeven movies, but so do you think that your interest in science fiction, like, how did that kind of dovetail with your interest in politics?
You know, I remember seeing, so I was born in 1976. I remember seeing Star Wars for the first time when I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. And I was just blown away. Like, I couldn't believe that anything this amazing could exist, you know, between the robot, you know, the droids, the robots, the Force, the spaceships, all of this stuff, Darth Vader, like it just captured my imagination, which is what good sci-fi does. You know, one of the things that I've been talking about over the last couple of years related to politics is that the Star Wars prequels are actually a really, really great political story about the accumulation of power. Because what does Palpatine do? You know, first by becoming senator and then becoming chancellor and then becoming, you know, supreme leader, in effect, you know, becoming the emperor. I mean, he starts a war and plays both sides against each other until he has enough power. And then what does he do? He shuts down one of the sides. That's what Revenge of the Sith is all about. And the story of Darth Vader, you know, becoming Darth Vader, or Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader in the midst of that, that's actually a secondary story to what really was an incredible sort of opera about power. So, you know, I know the prequels are easy to make fun of, and we can talk about Jar Jar Binks and some bad acting and, you know, some stiff love scenes and all that kind of stuff. But the underlying story is pretty spectacular, you know, and that's why the prequels, by the way, are so memeable. There's so many things in there. I am the Senate. I love democracy. There's so many lines in there from Palpatine specifically, but even from Padme. You know, this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. There's just great, rich stuff in there. And that, to me, if you combine a good political story with some droids and some magic and mystery, I'm hooked.
Well, yeah, and we're definitely going to have a lot more to say about Star Wars as we go. But I also wanted to ask you, have you ever been to Comic-Con or any science fiction conventions or things like that?
You know, believe it or not, I have never been to Comic-Con. I've been asked to go a couple times and just schedules haven't quite lined up. So I've never been to Comic-Con. I did get an early advance trip to the Star Wars land here at Anaheim at Disney, which was actually quite underwhelming, but we can hold more Star Wars for just a bit if you want. Yeah. Like most Star Wars things in the last couple of years, it was quite underwhelming.
Well, so tell us the story about how you watched Contact in the theater.
Contact changed my life. So for anyone listening that doesn't know the movie Contact, it was the only fiction that Carl Sagan ever wrote. Carl Sagan, who of course wrote Cosmos and was really a science communicator in a way that we think of Neil deGrasse Tyson now. He was also a professor at Cornell University, as was his wife, Ann Druyan. And it was 1997, it was the summer, and we were going to see Air Force One, which I'm sure everybody's seen with Harrison Ford. And a bunch of buddies of mine, we ate pot brownies and we walk into the movie theater and we're like bugging out, like, when you're just like seriously stupid high, you're laughing, you can't speak, like we could barely buy tickets because we were just crumbling on the floor laughing. I mean, we were really like out of our minds. And we get to the ticket counter. This is before Fandango and everything. You had to actually go to the place to buy the ticket. And we say, whatever it was, $5 for Air Force One. And they said it was sold out. And the only other thing that was about to start was this movie Contact. None of us had heard of it. And we're all stoned out of our minds. And we sat down in that theater. And if you remember that opening panorama scene in Contact, which is the incredible expanse of the universe, where it starts with a shot of the Earth, and then they just take you further and further out into the galaxy, into the universe, into the nebula, into the gases. And then it ends up in Ellie Arroway's eye as a child. That's the character that Jodie Foster played. I was just blown away. It got me. It got me. However a movie can get you, when a good movie, a good story captures you, it just got me. And then I love the movie. And the movie, actually, I just watched it a few weeks ago with the Rubin Report community. And the movie really, if anything, it's even better now than it was 20 years ago, because it is related to so many of the things going on right now about science and religion and belief and government and just so much of what we all talk about right now and what we all focus on right now. So after that movie, I ended up reading a whole bunch of Carl Sagan's books. It really opened me up to the world of science and discovery and exploration. And what I love about it is, the beauty of Contact is that there were no lightsabers, there were no magical creatures or anything like that. It's a science-based movie in the way that Interstellar is like a science-based movie. So, as opposed to a great sci-fi movie like Aliens, well, I'm not saying that aliens don't exist, and we won't get to that future one day too, but something that felt like it was purely based in science for science sake. And that's why it felt so real and cool and raw.
One of the pieces of art that you had in the background on your set for a long time was it's like the NASA Grand Tour painting with all the rocket ships, sort of retro rocket ships. I was just wondering if there's any story behind how you came to acquire that.
Well, it's sort of everything that I've talked about here. My set designer just knows the type of stuff that I like, and we wanted something kind of colorful, and she was trying to find something kind of futury and funky and a little offbeat. And, it's funny because I've now got some really spectacular original pieces on my set, but the amount of emails that we get, what is that? Where can I get it? Mm-hmm. We actually, when my book came out, we printed we bought a couple copies of that I signed and sent to people because people just absolutely, the colors are really cool. The planes look cool. It's pretty awesome.
You also have this one of the Millennium Falcon jumping to hyperspace. Is there a story behind that one?
Well, that one, so that's an original by Kaylin Rose Janet. It's KaylinRoseJanet.com, Caylin. That's an original 5-foot by 8-foot painting that she did in our house. And for those that haven't seen it, it's the view from the Millennium Falcon going into hyperspace. It's a little minimalistic, so you're not seeing much of the Millennium Falcon really, but you're just seeing that beautiful, the beginning of that burst of light, that burst of color. And that painting, she's done a bunch of originals for us. She's an incredible artist. But first off, the size, 5 foot by 8. But to do the meticulous drawing of those lines, that thing was, it was not a labor of love. That was a real hard slog to get through. But, I have obviously a lot of, fairly famous and influential people coming through my house, and pretty much every single person stops and comments about that painting.
So having loved Star Wars and this science fiction your whole life, did you ever have people push back against that or make fun of you or, tell you should be reading something else other than science fiction?
It's interesting because I was definitely a nerd as a kid, and I think I'm still a nerd in a certain regard. The word nerd has sort of shifted and morphed from in the 80s, it was like Revenge of the Nerds, that nerds were just obsessed with math and computers when we didn't even know what computers were, and loved science fiction and stuff like that. And I think I was a different kind of a nerd in that I loved all of those movies. Again, even Total Recall, which I mentioned before, I think that came out in maybe 88, 89. I'm 12 years old. I was obsessed with that thing. All the Star Wars movies, all of the things that you mentioned at the top. I was really into video games. Most of my days were filled in the basement playing Nintendo and Sega Genesis and all that kind of stuff. So I was really immersed in that culture, but I wasn't a math nerd in that sort of traditional sense. I'm actually not that great at math. Math is one of my deficiencies. I'm much better. I was always better in the languages than I was in math. So nerd culture, I really like because it feels very authentic to me. Pretty much every Halloween, if it's Halloween, I'm going as a Star Wars character. I don't remember the last Halloween that I did I was Kylo Ren this year. I was Obi-Wan last year. I think I was Anakin before that. So, these things, it's why these things, it's sort of why these things leach into our system, and that, good stories can tell you a much deeper truth. I think one of the things that has sort of screwed up Star Wars is that, the originals, there was a truth there about finding your path, and that sometimes you have to go through your father in this case to find it. And then the prequels had what I referred to earlier as this really great political story. And I think what Star Wars ran up against in these last three, although I liked Force Awakens until the other two came out, and then I think that the middle one, Last Jedi, was so bad that it just mangled it to the point where Rise of Skywalker was actually fine, but it was just doing damage control the entire movie. But I think the reason that they're sort of bad is because as they handed them over to Disney and they just became sort of giant money makers, which is not what the originals were about, right? I mean, there's all those tons of stories about George Lucas going over budget and they didn't think it was going to happen and they were inventing all of these special effects and all this stuff. I think they handed something over to Disney, and then it just became, all right, how do we make money? How do we blow things up? There's the story, maybe you know a little bit about it more than I do, but that they didn't even write the three stories out. So each director sort of had their own crack at it. So, JJ writes something for Force Awakens. Rian Johnson basically completely aborted it in Last Jedi, and then they bring JJ back and he has to just fix the whole thing. And that's why Last Jedi, even though it was fine, it felt like a race. Like there's never a moment to breathe in it because the whole time he's just trying to patch the ship before it sinks. And I mention all this because I think we need new stories. We desperately need new stories. So anytime I, see some cool sci-fi thing come across Netflix or wherever, I'm always super excited. I watched a movie called Aniaria. Have you heard about this one? I think
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah. And, it's somewhat low budget and it's from Sweden. But a really, really super interesting story about, it's dystopian in that it's a cruise ship in space that basically breaks down and they're going to be in space lost forever. And, they take it over decades of what happens as people sort of die and turn to religion and mysticism and all sorts of things. And I just thought it was super interesting. So for me, it's not about big budgets necessarily. It's like, give me something that's new and original and makes me think. And that's what I love.
Right, and I promise we're going to get to Star Wars, but before that, I did want to bring up your new book.
All right, I'll stop with the Star Wars stuff.
which I read, and I guess I should say, I've been watching you since on your videos since probably 2013. I was a subscriber to the Young Turks for a couple years, and I'll get to that. But so the book is dedicated to Ben Affleck, and I was wondering if you could just talk for people who don't know any of this stuff. Why is the book dedicated to Ben Affleck?
Yeah. I don't know Ben Affleck. I've never met Ben Affleck. I don't think he was a particularly good Batman. I think he probably agrees with that, as do most of the fans. But I dedicated the book to Ben Affleck because there's a story that I tell in the book, which happened, it took place in, I believe, the fall of 2014. And this was when Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist and mostly known for mindful meditation now, he was on Real Time with Bill Maher, and Affleck was on as well. And Affleck was on the side of the table where the three guests are. That's where they're doing panel and they're sort of just talking about current events and things like that. And Sam came on to discuss his book, which I have actually right in front of me here. It's called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. So naturally, Bill Maher talks about religion and atheism a lot, and they started talking about the necessity to be able to separate ideas from people, meaning you should be able to criticize any set of ideas and you don't want to be bigoted towards people. This is something we all know. You could criticize the set of ideas that is the Democratic Party platform. That doesn't mean you hate all Democrats. If you were to criticize the ideas of the Old Testament, nobody would say you hate all Jews, and likewise for the New Testament and Christians. And in this case, they started talking about the Quran and that you should be able to criticize the ideas in the Quran, but of course you don't want to be bigoted towards all Muslim people. We all know this is a very basic idea, actually. But what happened was Affleck heard that and he got very red in the face and very angry, and he was pounding his hands on the table and his voice was trembling. And there were three words that were heard around the world. He called Bill Maher and Sam Harris gross and racist, even though they had said nothing gross and racist and had gone out of their way to explain what they were talking about quite clearly. And what I saw happen after that was truly remarkable, because suddenly the left liberal media was attacking Bill Maher for being racist. So I didn't even know who Sam Harris was at the time, but Bill had been the standard bearer for the last 3 decades, let's say 30 some odd years in America, the most outspoken lefty we've had on television. And suddenly, because Batman called him racist, now everyone's calling him racist. And I saw basically the entire left run with that narrative and try to destroy him and try to destroy Sam. And that really was my wake-up moment, because I had been thinking this for a while. As you said, I was on the Young Turks. I had been sitting around with a bunch of colleagues who were calling everyone racist and bigoted and homophobic all the time. And the math wasn't working out for me anymore, meaning it didn't make sense that we could be so morally right and everyone else could be such evil people. Like that just, it seemed too simple, too easy. And once I realized that, and then I had this A-list actor sort of, for lack of a better word, act it out in front of me, it really caused a massive political shift in my mind. And I started talking about that quite openly and honestly. And I think that that's when my career started really picking up, because a lot of people were thinking the same thing and they just didn't have the words for it.
Well, right. So I had a very similar experience because, actually how I started watching the Young Turks is I've always been a big fan of Bill Maher, and his, the season ended and I just typed into Google shows like Bill Maher, and it came up with the Young Turks, which at the time seemed to make sense. They both just seemed to me to be sort of irreverent left-wing political talk shows, kind of, similar. Mm-hmm. And so I watched it, as I said, for a couple of years. I watched, hours and hours of you on the show, obviously. And then there was the thing with Ben Affleck. And then on the Young Turks, I tune in the next day and they're just like completely going off on Sam Harris and saying that he wants to launch a nuclear first strike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a series of crazy things like that.
And, I was quite familiar with Sam Harris's work at that time. I had read, I think, both of his books that were out, and I'd watched pretty much every interview or, appearance that he had done. And so I knew that this was just not based in reality at all. And so I was, this to show you how naive I was at the time, I sort of sent in an email to the Young Turks saying, like, guys, you need to fact check this because this is not right, Mm-hmm. And just watching their intransigence, over the next couple of weeks, I just, canceled my subscription and haven't watched it since.
Wow, we are co-travelers, my friend. Yeah, I was working there at the time, and believe me, I know, and they all knew about all the emails they were getting, the cancellations they were getting. But I don't like talking about them that much, but I can tell you that Cenk is such an ideologue. He doesn't care what's true. He cares who he can destroy on his quest to prove whatever it is he believes, which I don't even know what that is, and I don't really waste any time thinking about them anymore. But it was laid out very clearly by them to probably thousands of people that what they were doing was dishonest. And when Sam came in and did that 3-hour interview with Cenk, it's on YouTube, and if you watch it about minute 18, Cenk just says he doesn't believe in probability theory. Sam brings up something about probability theory, and Cenk just says he doesn't believe in it. And it's like, well, that's what we're dealing with. So how are we gonna have a thoughtful conversation? And I think probably what happened to you is similar to what happened to me, which is then it's like once you see it, you see this actually gross attack on the truth. Once you see it, then the rest of it starts crumbling very quickly.
Right. I can really remember vividly, I told my girlfriend I was canceling my Young Turks subscription, and she said, but you love the Young Turks. And they were almost like friends of mine, that I watched them for an hour or two every day. I mean, I was really, fond of the show. And I was just like, I just don't feel like I I believe, like this is something I know a lot about, and I know how wrong what they're saying is. And there's all these other things they talk about that I don't know a lot about. So how do I know that they're not giving me wrong information about any of those other things too?
Yes, I love that. I love that because that's what it takes to have your awakening. I always tell people, it's like you will eventually have an original thought or a divergent thought. And once you have that thought, you will start looking at all the other stuff differently. And that sounds like exactly what you just laid out there, that you're going, wait, this is the topic I know a lot about. I know this guy, Sam Harris, isn't racist. I know they're lying about what he said and manipulating videos and all of this other stuff. So what does that mean about all the other stuff that's not in my wheelhouse? So that's so great hearing you say that, because trust me, man, you are not alone. I know so many people, the amount of emails that I got from people all over the world that were saying the exact same thing. So in many ways, they did more to red pill, to take a Matrix reference. They did more to red pill more people than we could have ever had happen on their own, because sometimes the lies are the easiest way to wake people up once they see it.
Right. But so thinking back on that, it's actually strange thinking back on it now, how strange it seemed to me at the time that people would be saying things that were just completely untrue, because it's become so common now. And just in the course of, doing research for this podcast, I just come across all these stories where there's something that's sort of floating around in the media. And then I read a book or I, talk to an expert and I find out that it's not true. And I just have a couple of things I wanted to mention.
Sure.
Peter Thiel wants to end women's suffrage. Palmer Luckey financed a massive troll army. And Jordan Peterson wants the government to force women to marry incels. Are all just things that, I might well have believed those, if not for the fact that I do this podcast and I spend a lot more time on this than a normal person.
In many ways, that's the whole purpose of my book, right? The subtitle is Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. I'm not trying to convince you that every one of my political positions is correct or exactly right or what you have to believe. But I'm showing you that I have a political lens that is just a piece of a much wider philosophical lens that I view the world through. And these are the positions that I take from that. I'll just address that last one. What was it? Jordan Peterson wants what to marry incels?
The government to force women to marry incels?
I mean, really think about the absurdity of that, like the real absurdity of that. I toured with Jordan for a year and a half. I never heard the guy say anything remotely close to that. He doesn't want to force marriage on anyone. He does believe in the institution of marriage, and he believes that it's good for societies to foster marriage because that fosters the family, and that will help us build good institutions over generations and help humanity to flourish. But I never even heard him comment on incels, actually. I've never heard him say the word incels. I'm not saying he hasn't said it, but a lot of people would say, oh, all of the people who show up to Jordan Peterson shows are angry young men. And now, first off, that wasn't true. It was usually about 60-40 male to female, but there were ages all over the board, and there were gay people and straight people and black people and white people and everything else. But I would always think it was such an odd criticism anyway, because let's say it was all angry young men. And if Jordan was giving them a message of positivity, of get your life in order, clean your room, stand up straight with your shoulders back, and helping them get their lives in order, well, then wouldn't it be good to be talking to a group of angry young men if you're making them less angry? But the media, I think what belies your wider point is that this is what the media does. The Young Turks were the first sort of in on the YouTube game in media, and they became basically click whores, and they taught us all of the bad practices, which my channel doesn't use anymore. But, they just wanted clicks. So you just write crazy things about whoever's popular. They do it about me now. It's like, it is what it is.
Speaking of all the kind of angry young men thing, you had a video recently about the Todd Phillips movie Joker, which was, as far as I can remember, the first time you've dedicated a video to like one commenting on a single movie.
Yeah.
In a long, long time. And I was just wondering kind of what prompted you to devote that kind of focus to that particular movie.
Yeah, I don't do that kind of stuff on my channel too much. I obviously mostly do interviews, and then I do live streams where I'm talking about politics and answering questions and things like that. But I really felt that there was something really important about the movie Joker. First off, it felt like a piece of art to me, which, I like all the superhero movies. I really enjoy all of them for the most part. There's a couple exceptions, but I think most of them are pretty good. especially the Marvel ones. Actually, the DC ones I think have been pretty bad almost across the board. But the Marvel ones have been quite good. And when I say DC, I'm not including the original Batman trilogy, which was spectacular. But I thought it was a piece of art. It felt like a real film, like a throwback to something else that wasn't animatronic and wasn't computer generated and had a real story and really was about pain and didn't pull any punches. And, you know, at the end of the movie, I tweeted something about how, you know, I saw all of the lefties were rejoicing over the movie because at the end, it seems like the Joker's winning and, you know, chaos is going to ensue and it's sort of like Antifa is taking over. And I tweeted something about that because it was like, wow, you guys really do have the world totally backwards because you think the Joker is a good guy. And that's not to say the Joker didn't have it rough and the world wasn't rough to him and all of those things that happened to him in the movie. But the Joker's a bad guy. Burning the world and rejoicing in the burning of the world, that is the bad guys. But I saw so many people on the left saying, what, this is like vindication of their worldview. And it's like, no, only if you think the bad guys are the good guys. That's not to say that there aren't forces that help make people bad, right? That isn't to say that the Joker wasn't wronged by people or didn't have reasons to be aggrieved. But if you're going to end up murdering people and burning the whole country or the city down, Gotham down, well, then you're definitely not the good guy. So I felt it had something to say. And that's what I mean about, you know, sort of good art, good sci-fi. Like, what does a really good science fiction movie do? It makes you think about what the future could be like. And although Joker wasn't sci-fi in and of itself, it makes you think about what could bad forces actually do. And I think it painted it in a pretty honest, stark, pretty painful way.
You were also talking, though, in that video about how so many people in the media were sort of panicking that the movie would inspire real violence, which seems sort of fantastical.
Well, it because that just feeds their narrative that somehow, well, that was what really my tweet was also belying, which is that, like, you know, the idea is, they're Trump supporters is what they were trying to say. Trump supporters are angry young men and they're going to watch this movie and then they're going to burn down the city. And it's like, no, it was aimed at the Antifa guys who, again, they're the bad guys in the movie. So the movie did do something really clever. But, you know, this is what the media does with everything. Anything interesting. If you're interesting and you actually say something, the media tries to figure out how to destroy you. So they were trying to scare people from seeing the movie. I mean, that in effect was it. And of course, there was no violence related to it. And by the way, had there been violence, you can't blame it on the movie because art is art. That would be like saying we can't have books. We can't have movies about anything. You could watch literally any movie and copy something that it happened in it. Virtually every movie has some level of violence. The idea that this movie was going to instigate people. I mean, it's all, you know, now that it's a year later or whatever it is, it's like, wow, what stupidity that people were writing these quote unquote think pieces.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and you talk a lot in the book about issues with the left-wing media, which I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for that. I have a lot of frustrations with the left-wing media. You don't really talk about the right-wing media. I'm not sure how exactly you feel about them. I mean, I have not had great experiences with the right-wing media either.
Well, it depends what you mean by right-wing media. So the reason I attack the media, so usually I attack the media separately than I don't say left-wing media. I say the media because the media is mostly left. So meaning that if you look at everything mainstream, ABC, NBC, CBS, you know, CNN, MSNBC, you look Politico, The Atlantic, like virtually everything is left at this point. And the counter to that pretty much in terms of mainstream is Fox News. Now, Fox lets me on all the time. I go on pretty much every show on the network. They never ask me a question beforehand. I can say whatever I want. I disagree with the hosts all the time. Tucker and I disagree about regulating big tech. That's a huge issue. All the hosts know that I'm pro-choice. That's a big no-no for conservatives. And they let me do my thing. Now, that's not to say Fox is perfect. They are what they are. That's fine. But when I attack the media, what I'm really attacking is that there is this New York Times, CNN based lefty media that they think they know how the whole world should operate. And if you think differently, they're there to destroy you. So when you say right-wing media, I'd want to know a little bit more about what you mean by that, because if you mean like just random right-wing websites, then you're probably right that there's probably some really awful ones. But what would you say includes right-wing media besides Fox, per se?
Well, let me talk about this experience I had. So, and you might have heard about this. It kind of became a thing. But so I interviewed an author named Andy Duncan, and he had written a short story called Senator Bilbo. And it's a parody of Lord of the Rings, where there's a sort of an old prejudiced hobbit who's prejudiced against orcs, and he's resisting the facts that orcs are being integrated into the Shire. And it's a really good story. I think it's really funny. And so I interviewed him about it, and it just like blew up on all these right-wing websites. I mean, it was like National Review, Glenn Beck, RT. There's a whole list, but the ones that I'll particularly mention are the Daily Mail, Daily Wire, and the Times of London, because they all had headlines that contained quotes in quotation marks that were just invented quotes, that he hadn't said and I hadn't said. And so that's why I kind of feel like there's this sort of outrage and clickbait and laziness on both sides, where the two, I don't know, media ecosystems. I mean, I realize the left is a lot bigger and more influential, but they sort of seem to be mirroring each other and mirroring the worst aspects of each other.
Yeah, so I didn't hear about that specifically, and I'll totally Google that after this, and that's really interesting and disheartening to hear from some of my friends, let's say at the Blaze or Daily Wire. So I can't comment on the specifics of it. But believe me, I'm not here sitting, like the right is so perfect and the left is so evil. I am not doing that at all. What I have found that, broadly speaking, the right is much more open to divergent views and agreeing to disagree and live and let live, where the left isn't. But I think what you said before that actually is the broader point, which is that so much of mainstream is left that when I attack the media, that's what I'm attacking, because that's the bigger beast, rather than attacking, like, could I just, do what CNN does all day long, which is, like these guys like Oliver Darcy, their media correspondent, who like sits there and watches Fox all day long, waiting for somebody to say something, or Media Matters, who watches Fox all day long so they can find me, pausing in an instance they don't like, and they think that means that I meant something else. It's like, yeah, I suppose I could do that, but the balance isn't quite balanced out. So that's why I don't focus that much on the right. But I'll totally check out what you're talking about, and that's not to say that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. All right. So now we can get to Star Wars. I know you've really been eager for that. Actually, it's funny because you talk in the book about how difficult it was coming out of the closet, telling people that you were a gay man, and then how difficult it was coming out of the political closet, telling people that you were developing more libertarian political philosophy. I feel a little bit like that because I'm going to come out of the closet here as that I kind of liked The Last Jedi. So I don't know, this could get ugly, I guess.
All right, here we go.
Well, so let me tell you how I felt, because I was really disappointed with The Force Awakens, because I felt like I waited my whole life to see what happened after Return of the Jedi. And it felt like The Force Awakens wasn't that it was kind of a soft reboot of the whole Star Wars universe. And it didn't feel like, there wasn't the New Republic. There wasn't, it just felt sort of disconnected from everything that had come before.
So let's pause there and do each one. So because I've heard a lot of that. So what I find is that people that didn't like Force Awakens did like Last Jedi, and I'm the reverse of that. So we're on opposite sides of this. So wait, let's just do it for a second here. So what I found for Force Awakens was that the reason that I loved it, and as I said before, I like it less and less each time I watch it now, because I thought the other two were basically such a mess. What I liked about it was, you got to remember that in the context of how it came out, with Disney rebooting the entire thing, all of the negative press about the prequels, which, as I'm saying, I think actually were pretty good and we'll keep looking at more fondly over the years, they had such a huge lift to fix the franchise that JJ, look, did he take the biggest risks? Of course not, because in essence, he just rebooted A New Hope story. It's almost the exact same story. So could he have taken more risks? Sure. Is it silly that Star Killer Base is just a bigger Death Star? Yeah. And then, you know what, in Rise of the Skywalker, now ships can do the Death Star thing. So they just kept making things bigger and bigger, which in and of itself doesn't make things good. That's what Zack Snyder does with all his monsters. They just have bigger explosions, and it's like, no, we've seen explosions already. But I thought Force Awakens, it had to reset things. It had to connect the old to the new. It had to feel unique, and all of those things. And I felt it did all of that. And then coupled with the fact that last scene, when she walks up to Luke, it's so freaking powerful. Like you said, you were waiting your whole adulthood for this. Like, I felt when that movie ended, I was like, oh man, I am back in. Like, they fully got me. So I was willing to overlook some of that stuff, but I fully get, and I'd be happy to hear more about it. I get the position of, they just reset it. They didn't, or they just rebooted it, not reset it or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that's basically, I mean, Force Awakens to me felt like sort of a movie written by committee, that was just sort of a corporate product, and it was not at all what I wanted out of Star Wars. So I went into Last Jedi with pretty low expectations, and I felt like it was really surprising. And you know, that the director, you know, it felt like there was one person who had a vision. And I understand people not liking it because one description of the movie I heard one time is it's like watching someone take out all your Star Wars toys you played with when you were a kid and just break them in front of you.
Yeah.
So I totally get that, but just for me, I just thought it was, and especially like, you know, and then I felt like they just went back to the sort of written by committee for The Rise of Skywalker. But I felt like I could have told you going into The Rise of Skywalker, I feel like I could have told you the whole story without even having seen the movie. And The Last Jedi was surprising, and it took a lot of risks, and that kind of endeared it to me.
That's really interesting. So first off, I like what you said about expectations, because my expectations for Last Jedi were through the roof because I loved Force Awakens. So we had a totally reverse experience, which is actually very cool as two people who love Star Wars, and we're just looking at it from different perspectives. So that's number one. In terms of taking risks, the reason I think they dropped the ball, well, first off, that opening scene with Snoke and the phone call, with General Hux and the phone call is just patently stupid. But putting that aside, the moment that the movie could have been incredible, they completely dropped the ball. And Rise of Skywalker did this about 5 times. That moment after Snoke is killed and they have that awesome scene in the Red Room.
Yeah.
And they're fighting on the same side. When they shake hands or they're putting their hands out, you suddenly feel like, holy cow, Star Wars is about to become something completely else. The dark and the light are about to come together. Like it actually felt like they were going to do something risky and dangerous and really something that had never been done before, other for that brief second when Darth Vader throws Palpatine over the edge, you know, to save Luke. But that Rey and Kylo were going to be teammates. Like that would have been a risky, bold move. But what do? They immediately, she knocks him out and she leaves. And it's like then in Rise of Skywalker, or I'll hold the Rise of Skywalker stuff, but I thought that sort of stuff where they give you an emotional moment where you're like, holy cow, they're going to do something amazing. And then they just take it away from you right then and there. And then the other thing that I hated was if Luke's going to die at the end, well, then why have him force projectile there as a Force ghost? Let the guy get on the freaking X-Wing and let him show up and let Kylo kill him. And then it's a sort of an Obi-Wan ending instead of just meditating and then disappearing. That just felt cheap and weak to me. Because then when you see him, the moment before that, when you see him seeing Leia, it's like he's not even there.
I totally agree with you about that Kylo and Rey should have teamed up, or that would have been cool. And I think you see in all the trailers, they kind of tease that, you know, because somebody marketing the movie knows that would be more interesting. So I totally agree with that. I loved the confrontation between Kylo Ren and Luke at the end of The Last Jedi.
But why not just have him there? Why not just have him show up and do it in person? If he's trying to stall, right? The whole point is he's trying to stall so they can escape. Why not just get him there?
I only saw the movie once. I think he had already given away his X-Wing. I don't know.
No. The X-Wing's there. It's on Akchu or whatever that planet is. That you see it in the water.
I'll say I loved the just the dialogue, the like everything you just said is wrong, see you around kid stuff. Mm-hmm. And then also, you know, when we were watching the movie, my girlfriend was kind of elbowing me during the lightsaber fight, and she's like, his boots aren't making any marks on the ground. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're crazy, you know? And then she's like, yeah, I was right. And so there was this kind of like, oh, that's pretty clever. And my girlfriend saw that. And I don't know, it just made it kind of like a fun moment for me too.
Right. Yeah, look, this is different strokes, right? Like, you know, it's like we can love these things and love the lore and all of that stuff and just have different feelings about some of the execution.
Yeah. But I mean, I do feel like I liked the movie. I mean, I get that people, like, it wasn't what everyone wanted out of a Star Wars movie, but I do feel like the response online was really over the top negative. And I guess I'm just curious, as someone who really intensely disliked the movie, do you feel that the response was overly negative or not?
Well, I think it was overly negative because, you know, from my perspective, it deserved to be overly critiqued. I think it was also the audience trying to keep these people honest in a way. And, you know, Rian Johnson, it seems like Rian Johnson, I got the feeling that he didn't like Star Wars, basically. Like when he does that whole thing about Luke, you know, Luke is so bitter, that toss of the lightsaber. It's like Force Awakens ends with that great scene that I just referenced. You see him hold the lightsaber, you're get electricity up your spine. And next thing you know, they open up the other movie with that idiotic phone call with Hux, and then Luke's throwing the lightsaber, and we're like, oh no, what's happening here? So as far as the criticism, I mean, that's what people do. You know, that's what the fandom does, and it just sort of is, I think.
I guess, I mean, I feel like, you know, when I talk to actual people about the movie, there's a range of, about pretty much any movie, there's a range of opinion where some people liked it and some people didn't like it and some people thought it was okay and so on. But if I go on YouTube, it's just page after page after page of like, this is the worst movie ever, it ruined my life, it ruined Star Wars, like nothing will ever be okay again.
Yeah, you know, that also tells you about the beauty of Star Wars. Like, it made people feel all of these things, you know, and that's interesting. But wait, so what do you think about Rise of Skywalker? Because I think maybe we can get to some agreement on this, perhaps.
No, I hated it.
You hated it? See, that's so interesting. So when I saw it the first time in the theater, I saw it opening night, first showing. I could not enjoy it because the entire time I kept thinking it was going to derail. So I felt like I was like clutching my seat the whole time, like, oh God, at any moment this thing's going to go just be terrible. And it never became terrible in my view, but it did do some really terrible things that I think that ultimately destroyed the entire trilogy, including Force Awakens, which is every time you have an emotional moment. So this is what I'm referring to with Rey and Kylo in the last one. Every time you have an emotional moment, they take it away from you. So think about it. You think Chewie dies, right? You think he dies in that crash, that she causes the crash by using Force lightning. What a powerful moment. You kill Chewie, who everyone loves, and it was done by Rey, and it's the first time you've seen her use Force lightning. That's a powerful thing. Well, then what do they do 2 minutes later? Oh, you find out he's alive. C-3PO, with the memory loss, it's like that's the killing of C-3PO. That's pretty powerful. What do they do 5 minutes later? He's getting some of his memory back. And I think they did just a whole bunch of those that it's like, yeah, it makes the movie work. You know, a good movie, when you watch a good movie, when I referenced Contact before, if you watch Contact a couple times, you will get something more from it each time. You'll go, whoa, now that look that he gave him there, or I understand what he's really saying there differently, or this or that. But what a bad movie does is it makes it worse each time you watch it. And when I watched Rise of Skywalker the second time, I had no expectations anymore. But in many ways, I liked it less because I was like, oh, well, every time, you know, now you watch the Chewie thing and you know what's going to happen and there's no meaningful emotion attached to it. So I didn't think it was a terrible movie altogether. I thought it was better than Last Jedi, but I thought they're not doing anything honest here. He's just trying to clean up the mess that is what Rian Johnson left him.
Right. But I liked a lot of the stuff in The Last Jedi, like, because especially I think because I read so much fantasy and science fiction, I'm so over the, like, who's this person's parents? Like, I mean, it's in every fantasy series. And so when, in The Last Jedi, when they're like, no, you're nobody, you know, I was like, oh, I was not expecting that. That's kind of cool. And then, what was it?
Right. And then they take it away. Well, then they take it away in Last Jedi.
Yeah. And then
in Skywalker.
Yeah. You can go and listen to my review of Last Jedi. I'm like, I know what's going to happen next movie is that J.J. Abrams is going to come in and it's going to turn out that Rey is like Palpatine's niece's cousin or something. And it's just going to, like, you know, so there was that. And there was this whole thing in The Last Jedi about how, because one of the sort of issues with Star Wars as it's developed has been that it's sort of a little like weird that the Force is like the special purview of a kind of Force sensitive bloodline aristocracy. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that, you know, Rian Johnson was trying to take it in this direction. Like, no, the Force isn't just the Skywalker family. It's something that, you know, can be for everyone. It's sort of democratizing it somehow. And then that was just completely dropped. You know, it never came up at all in The Rise of Skywalker.
Well, that's what I mean about they didn't plot this thing out. Like, how did Kathleen Kennedy at Disney not sit down and even if, you know, they switched the director on the third one. Do you remember who it was? He was going to be the Looper guy, right? It was
Colin Trevorrow.
Right. He was the guy that did Jurassic World, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, how would you have not sat down with the three directors and said, listen, you can direct the movie however you want. You can add your style to it. You know, JJ obviously has a very specific style. And he really had a couple nods to the originals, with, flashes and things like that, or screen wipes, whatever you want to call them. But you could say to them, hey, you guys can do whatever you want, but the basic bones of the trilogy are this. This is the stuff that you sort of got to get to one way or another, so you have a cohesive thing. But it sounds like they never did that. And then I think what Kathleen Kennedy thought, it's sort of the reverse of what you're saying. I think she heard from the fans, and the fans were like, man, Last Jedi sucked. And now JJ, you just got to clean it up. I mean, JJ will never touch Star Wars again, because there's almost no win in it for him. And you can, in many ways, you can feel a certain, there's a certain death of Star Wars right now. A lot of the other things that they've done have not worked. Clone Wars, the Cartoon Network thing, I actually haven't watched the last season yet, but the fact that I haven't sort of tells you, because I did watch the whole other thing, but it sort of tells you I'm just kind of exhausted by the stories. I'm kind of curious to see what happens to Ahsoka. But it's sort of just I'm just sort of beat with these things. And even Mandalorian, I liked Mandalorian, but I didn't think it was great. Did you watch Mandalorian?
I actually liked it a lot.
Yeah,
it was sort of fun. It really captured the tone of A New Hope, I thought, and it was just enjoyable and unpretentious. And yeah, I watched it with my dad. It was just that kind of show.
Yeah, I liked it. I totally liked it, but I didn't love it. And I think part of that is just that I think Star Wars just desperately needs the Force. So that little moment with Baby Yoda was kind of cool. But then they do little odd things, like the last scene in the last episode of Mandalorian with the guy, I don't remember his name, but the guy in the TIE fighter that's obviously going to be the main bad guy.
Moff.
Whatever his name is, it's why isn't he in a mask? Why doesn't he look cool? Why is
Gideon.
it just a guy?
Is it Moff Gideon? I think
is that what it is? But it's put the guy in a mask or make him a creature or something. Instead, it's just a guy in an outfit, and it's okay, a guy. The bad guy's a guy in an outfit. Give us some freaking Star Wars here. Give me Jabba the Hutt and a freaking TIE fighter or whatever it is. But I feel it was just lazy story writing. Why is he just a guy in a suit?
Well, yeah, and
I know that's a little nitpicky.
No, and I agree with what you're saying. That it clearly, in retrospect, it was a mistake to have one movie directed by J.J. Abrams and another movie directed by Rian Johnson, who have such completely, conflicting aesthetics, and that it would have. I think it would have been better to pick one or the other to do all three movies. It probably would have worked out a lot better. But yeah, you say J.J. Abrams isn't going to touch Star Wars now, and it seems like Rian Johnson's probably not either, or Benioff and Weiss. And it seems there's just been so much drama around Star Wars that it's driving away talent. And I've heard the same thing with even the tie-in novels, that a lot of authors are telling editors, I don't want to write a Star Wars novel. I don't want to deal with all this, the politics, basically.
Yeah. Right. Well, it becomes one of those things where it's almost we didn't have a host at the Oscars last year, and I suspect we won't even have an Oscars this year. It's nobody wants to deal with the headache. But, you can also, I'm sure you've watched them. There's some pretty cool fan stuff that they've done on YouTube. The Obi-Wan thing that they did on YouTube, and there's a Kylo Ren one and a couple others. And it's the fans do really care about these things. And, they don't have all of the tech and all of the money and the big budgets to pull it off perfectly. But maybe handing some of these to some really unknowns, because the giant corporations, I don't know that they can handle the stories anymore. It's sort of by the time Endgame ended, the last Avengers movie, it was I wanted to barf, sort of. Not because it was bad, but it was enough of the same old stuff. And anyone that dies can come back, and time travel and all of these things. So it's sort of what you referenced earlier. You can always just erase whatever happened in the previous movie. And that takes away reality. You need a certain degree of reality to have good science fiction, I think.
So speaking of the powerful corporations, I watched your interview with Benny Johnson. The title was something like Winning the Culture War Through Star Wars Memes, which kind of, caught my attention. But one thing you said in there, you said, you're talking about The Last Jedi, and you said, it's the media then attacking the fan base. I don't know. Is it at the behest of the studio, or is it just because the whole machine kind of works like that? And I was just wondering, what do you mean by at the behest of the studio? And do you feel like any people in the media are kind of, I don't know, have weird conflicts of interest or something, or connections with the movie studios?
Yeah. So you're asking me sort of a what is Gamergate question at some level or something like that. I mean, look, I don't know if it's at the behest of studios or certain writers want to be liked by studios, so they write good reviews for movies that they know are bad so that they can keep a job at Variety or Hollywood Reporter or something like that. Like, I have no doubt that some of that exists. But it is odd that one of the things that we see all the time lately is when you bring out a movie like, let's say, the Ghostbusters reboot with the women. I remember everybody was going crazy on it before it even came out, and then it flopped. And I didn't see it in the theater, but I saw it, I rented it one night, and it's pretty freaking horrible. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It's pandering and just nothing. That has nothing to do with it being all women. It has something to do with bad writing, and maybe some of the actors weren't great in it or whatever. But it's like the media wrote there were so many stories on what an incredible movie it was, and it's feminism and powerful and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no. The movie sucked. Why can't you guys just be honest with us and be like, yes, it was a movie with all women. And they keep doing this in different degrees. They rebooted Ocean's 11 with all women. It's like, we don't need movies that are all men or all women. I'm a firm believer that men and women can be in movies together. So we do these odd things where then the media feels it must defend these movies because it's women. When in fact, the fans that are supposed to be going there don't like it. Or in some cases, maybe the fans are mostly men and maybe mostly men want to see more male Ghostbusters. Who the hell knows? But if the movie had been good, it would not have gotten the attack that it got. And that goes for the Star Wars one as well.
Well, and I agree that the Ghostbusters I thought was pretty mediocre, but I feel like that I'm able to watch these movies and, I liked Joker and I liked The Last Jedi and I disliked the Ghostbusters movie, so many of these things I feel like, especially on YouTube, I feel like I know what the people are going to say about this movie before they even see it, just based on its perceived side in the culture war. And I think that's really sad, or it's really too bad.
It is unfortunate that so much of just like your ability to just see something for face value and not hear so much about it first and all that is tough. I mean, even just trying to avoid spoilers and avoid stories and the hit pieces and all that stuff. It's like work now to avoid all of that stuff before you go to see something that hopefully you're going to enjoy.
All right. So we've just got about 10 minutes left. I have a couple more things I was going to ask. This is just sort of random, but I watched one of your interviews with Michael Malice, and he was dressed in a white suit. And you said, "Oh, you're looking like Leisure Suit Larry." Yeah. I was just wondering did you play Leisure Suit Larry or any of those Sierra Adventure games?
I used to play Leisure Suit Larry on my Gateway 2000 386 SX something 1 gigabyte or 1 gigabyte, 1 megabyte or something, bought it on the 3.5 hard, they were floppy disks, but they were the hard ones. Yeah. Way back when I used to play those. I used to play Escape from Monkey Island, which I really loved because it was fun. And Leisure Suit Larry and Escape from Monkey Island, were those both the same creators? I think they were.
No, one was Sierra and one was LucasArts.
Monkey Island was LucasArts, is that right? Yeah. Yeah, they were just sort of like fun. They had a good sense of humor, didn't take themselves too seriously. And then I liked other ones like, was it King's Quest?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? I loved King's Quest. The way it would make you think and the puzzles and all of that stuff. I really love that. And of course, Leisure Suit Larry, when you're a kid and there's like something sort of sexual in it, it's like whatever the hell it is, it seems like something,
Yeah, were you able to, because they had this quiz at the beginning of the game to make sure that you weren't a kid, where they would ask questions only an adult would know.
Well, they would do that also because they wanted you to look in the manuals to make sure that you actually bought the game and you didn't just copy the discs.
Yeah. Are you still into video games? In the acknowledgments, you say, to Sip and Ari for being my video game / intellectual sparring partners.
Yeah, those guys are really Sip. I met when we were I remember meeting him first day of kindergarten about 40 years ago almost, and Ari moved to my town when we were in third grade, and we've been doing all this stuff forever. I don't really have time anymore, unfortunately, to really do anything, but I do have my old school childhood Nintendo, which I cleaned and fixed myself, so I don't even have to blow in it. They still work. And usually if I have a little time, Contra is always my go-to for just like mindless fun, and I try to see how many lives I can beat it in without having to go for the full 30. Up, down, left, right, BA, select, start. Mario and some of the other ones. I've got an old Sega Genesis here. I do have a PlayStation 4, which the only thing that I'm playing right now in quarantine, I'm playing with my 9-year-old nephew and his dad, my brother-in-law. we play Gauntlet Slayer Edition, which it's just kind of mindless. You're just running around and slashing stuff and doing that together. But unfortunately, I just don't have enough time to really dive back into that world.
So, I do this podcast and I watch the Rubin Report and I'm like, wow, that looks really so much better than my podcast. Maybe someday I could turn my garage into a studio.
Make it happen, man.
What are the, what would be some advice you would have for I don't know, how many people and how much equipment and stuff do you need to transform your garage into a studio like the Rubin Report?
Yeah, well, I would say you gotta, there's so many things. I built this 4 years ago, and we are still even now pretty freaking cutting edge, and we're way ahead of the game on, you're watching all these CNN anchors and everybody else doing stuff from home. And we have a legit TV studio here. So I'm doing all my Fox appearances from here and virtually everything else that I do. I would say most importantly, don't cut corners. You're going to have to spend a little bit more to get the right lights, spend a little bit more to get the good cameras, spend a little bit more on the right backup equipment and all of those things, because it will be worth it in the end. When lockdown began and everybody started freaking out, I was like, look, if the internet works, we're going to be okay. And by the way, our internet then got really slow here in LA, and we had a satellite put in our roof. So we have, direct connection internet that's not shared with anyone. So I think just trying to be as ahead of the game as you can be is probably the best advice. Even though it feels a little amorphous, I suppose, but just try to see which way the winds are blowing and go with them sometimes.
And before anyone gets too excited, I don't even have a garage at this point. So
get a garage first. Small steps. See,
I heard you say that you're in one of these videos that you're trying to move a little bit away from politics and a little bit more toward culture. And I was wondering if you think you might ever start interviewing more science fiction authors or filmmakers on Rubin Report.
I would love to. If you've got a list of interesting people, I'd love to talk to some more. I had on the filmmaker side, I've had a couple interesting people on. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name right now. The guy who did American Psycho. I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. He's a friend of mine. I've been doing so many interviews lately.
Well, the book was Bret
Easton Ellis. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Man, there's a lot of interviews lately. And I like talking about, because I like talking about how people learn their craft and what makes them tick the way they do, but also especially if you put out something that feels like something powerful. So like American Psycho really felt like he was really saying something about culture and finance and capitalism and all sorts of stuff. If you can create something, write and or direct or produce, whatever it is, something that feels like something, it's like that's what makes the world go by. That's what makes the engine go. That's what captures our imagination. And I think that's totally cool. So yeah, I'm completely down to shift a little way. Unfortunately everything's become political. So I'm not as enamored with politics as I used to be.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good note to end on, Dave. Do you have any just final thoughts or anything else you wanted to let people know about?
This was a thoroughly enjoyable interview, very different than most of the ones that I've done. But I really love this concept that, we could both have our imaginations captured as kids by a story, in this case, Star Wars, and then view the incarnations of it just very differently. It says something about the uniqueness of individual people. And it's like when you explain to me why you liked Last Jedi and the things that it flipped, that you wanted flipped, and that you felt what you felt about Force Awakens because of the retread, and yet I liked it for the exact same reason. That really it's sort of why I like interviewing people, because when you find someone that you think is a decent human being and you go, whoa, you just view something really differently than I do. That's a very cool place as long as you're both not killing each other. So next time we can try this with lightsabers and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely send you some suggestions for science fiction people you might want to talk to. I've interviewed, 400 or 500 of them, so I definitely have some ideas.
So you might have a couple. All right, yeah, that would be great. I'd be happy to hear it.
All right, great. So we've been speaking with Dave Rubin about his new book, Don't Burn This Book. So Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, really enjoyed it.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Dave Rubin for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.